When I first bought my property, I thought I'd stumbled onto a slice of paradise. 20 sprawling acres, a private lake, and plenty of space to enjoy peace and quiet. It was the dream I'd been saving for years. I built a small cabin near the lake, perfect for fishing or just relaxing by the water. It was my sanctuary and I loved every inch of it. The trouble started about a year after I moved in. The local homeowners association didn't technically have jurisdiction over my property since I wasn't part of their development. My land had been owned by the same family for generations, long before the HOA neighborhood sprang up nearby. Still, they liked to act as if their reach extended everywhere. At first it was small things. An HOA board member once stopped me as I was unloading supplies at the cabin. "You know," she said, waving a glossy newsletter in my face, "it would be neighborly of you to follow our landscaping guidelines. It keeps property values up." I just smiled and nodded, knowing full well I had no obligation to follow their rules. I figured ignoring them would be the easiest way to avoid conflict. That was my first mistake. A few months later, I started noticing unfamiliar cars parked along the gravel road leading to my lake. At first, I thought it was just people exploring the area. But when I found an entire family picnicking on my dock one afternoon, I realized this wasn't a coincidence. "Excuse me," I said, walking up to them. "This is private property." The man looked up from his sandwich and blinked at me. "Oh, the HOA said we could use the lake. They said it's part of the community." I felt my blood pressure spike. "The HOA has no authority here. This is my land." The family packed up quickly, looking embarrassed, but the damage was done. Somehow the HOA had decided my lake was theirs to share. That evening, I drove to the HOA president's house. Linda, a no-nonsense woman with a permanent scowl, answered the door. "We need to talk," I said, holding up one of their newsletters. "Why are you telling people they can use my lake?" She raised an eyebrow. "It's a community feature. We've always considered it part of the neighborhood." "It's not," I said firmly. "I have the deed to prove it. This is private property." Linda crossed her arms. "Maybe you should consider joining the HOA. It would make things simpler." "Not happening," I replied. "Keep your members off my land." She just smiled, that smug HOA smile that told me this wasn't over. Over the next few weeks, the problem only got worse. I installed no trespassing signs along the road and near the lake, but they were either ignored or mysteriously disappeared. More cars showed up and more families treated my lake like their personal resort. One Saturday morning, I found a group of teenagers having a full-blown barbecue on my property. When I asked them to leave, they laughed and said Linda had told them it was fine. That was the last straw. I went home and pulled out my property deed, along with every legal document I had. It was time to take this to the next level. If the HOA thought they could walk all over me, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I spent the next few days researching property laws and contacting a towing company willing to enforce trespassing rules. Linda and her HOA buddies had poked the bear, and now it was time to fight back. They wanted to play games? Fine. But this was my lake and I wasn't about to let them take it from me. I wasn't about to sit by and let the HOA turn my private lake into their community pool. Armed with my property deed and a solid plan, I decided to take action. But first, I needed evidence to prove just how far the trespassing had gone. I installed motion-activated security cameras along the main path leading to my lake. I also set up trail cameras near the parking spots where people like to leave their cars. Within a week, I had dozens of videos showing cars pulling up, families unloading picnic baskets, and kids splashing around in the lake, all without my permission. The footage wasn't just for me. I planned to use it in case this turned into a legal battle, but it was also satisfying to see proof of their blatant disregard for my property. My next move was to contact a towing company. I explained the situation and showed them the documentation proving my ownership of the land. They were more than happy to help, especially when I mentioned the HOA had been falsely claiming rights to the property. "We'll handle it," the manager assured me. "Just give us a call when you see any unauthorized vehicles." With that piece in place, I set about crafting my response to the HOA. A few days later, I attended one of their public meetings. Though I wasn't a member, anyone could attend, and I figured it was time to confront Linda and her cronies in front of the other residents. The meeting was held in a small community center, with Linda presiding at the head of the table. She spotted me as soon as I walked in, her lips curling into a smirk. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "What brings you here?" "I'm here to address a serious issue," I replied, holding up a folder filled with photos and printed screenshots from my security footage. It seems the HOA has been encouraging its members to trespass on my private property. The room fell silent. Linda's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. The lake has always been considered part of the neighborhood, she said dismissively. I held up the deed. This says otherwise. My property lines are clearly marked, and the lake is entirely within my boundaries. The HOA has no legal claim to it. One of the board members, an older man who seemed uncomfortable with the tension, cleared his throat. If the lake is private, then why would our members be using it? Because Linda has been telling them they can. I shot back. Murmurs rippled through the room. I handed copies of the deed and my security footage to the board members. Here's the evidence. Unauthorized vehicles on my property, people tearing down my no trespassing signs, and multiple instances of trespassing, all because of false claims made by this HOA. Linda's face turned red. This is absurd. We've done no such thing. I have neighbors who've told me otherwise, I said. If this continues, I'll have no choice but to file formal complaints with the county and pursue legal action. The murmurs grew louder. Some residents began whispering to each other, clearly uneasy with the situation. Linda tried to regain control of the meeting, but the damage was done. Her authority was already starting to crumble. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to apologize. We didn't know, one woman said, looking genuinely remorseful. Linda told us it was a community feature. We wouldn't have gone if we'd known it was private. Just keep off my land, I replied. That's all I ask. Despite the apologies, the trespassing didn't stop. Linda doubled down, sending out a newsletter claiming I was selfishly restricting access to a shared resource. It was clear she wasn't going to back off, but I was ready for her next move. I contacted the towing company and gave them the green light. From that moment on, any car parked on my property without permission would be towed. The game was on and I was done playing nice. You said. It didn't take long for the chaos to start. The very next weekend I spotted the first batch of trespassers. A group of SUVs and sedans had lined up along the gravel path to the lake, unloading coolers, fishing gear, and beach chairs. It was a full-on party and they weren't even trying to hide it. I took a deep breath, dialed the towing company and explained the situation. They assured me they'd be there shortly. Then I walked down to the lake. Excuse me, I called out. The group turned to look at me, some looking sheepish, others defiant. This is private property, I said, holding up the deed for emphasis. You're trespassing. You need to leave. A burly man with a fishing rod scoffed. Linda said we could park here. It's part of the community. No, I replied firmly. Linda lied to you. This lake and all the land around it are mine, and I have the paperwork to prove it. You've got 5 minutes to pack up and leave, or your cars will be towed. They thought I was bluffing. About 10 minutes later, the tow trucks arrived. The sound of the diesel engines was music to my ears as the drivers began hitching up vehicles. The trespassers rushed up the hill, shouting and waving their arms. You can't do this, one woman shrieked. I absolutely can, I replied. This is my property and you're here illegally. If you want your cars back, take it up with the towing company. By the time the last vehicle was hauled away, the lake was blissfully quiet again. That night, my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. Some were angry, accusing me of being petty and unneighborly. Others thanked me for standing up to the HOA. Linda, of course, was furious. She sent out a scathing email to the neighborhood, calling me vindictive and a threat to the community's harmony. I didn't respond. My cameras were still rolling and the tow trucks were on standby. Over the next few weeks, the pattern repeated itself. Trespassers showed up, ignored my signs, and got towed. Word began to spread, and eventually the number of cars dwindled. But Linda wasn't ready to admit defeat. One morning, I woke up to find a bright orange flyer taped to my mailbox. Emergency HOA meeting, it read in bold letters. Topic: ongoing disputes regarding the lake. I smirked. Linda was desperate, and I was more than happy to let her dig her own grave. At the meeting, Linda was in full attack mode. This man has been bullying our residents, she declared, waving a stack of papers. He's towing cars, harassing families, and ruining the spirit of this neighborhood. I let her rant for a while before standing up. Let me clarify a few things, I said calmly, pulling out my own stack of documents. This lake is my private property. I have the deed, the survey maps, and the legal backing to prove it. I clicked a remote, and the projector lit up with photos and videos from my security cameras. The audience watched in silence as footage of trespassers appeared, complete with timestamps. I installed no trespassing signs which were torn down. I gave multiple warnings which were ignored. I even spoke directly to Linda about the issue, and she refused to address it. The room buzzed with murmurs. Then I dropped the bombshell. And for those of you who've been told this is a community feature, I'd like to know why Linda has been collecting lake access fees. The crowd gasped. I held up copies of receipts I'd obtained from disgruntled neighbors. Linda's face went pale. I spoke to several of you who paid Linda for access to my property, I continued. That money didn't go to the HOA. It went straight into Linda's pocket. The murmurs turned to angry whispers. Linda stood, her voice shaky. This is a misunderstanding. I was only trying to save it, I interrupted. The county has already been notified and an investigation is underway. You abused your position to profit off something that was never yours. The room erupted in shouts. Residents who'd been loyal to Linda turned against her, demanding answers. By the time the meeting ended, Linda's reign was effectively over. She resigned from her position the following day, citing personal reasons. But her troubles were far from over. The legal consequences were just beginning. As for me, I finally had my peace back. The lake was mine again, and the HOA had learned a hard lesson about overstepping its bounds. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more move to make, one that would ensure no one ever tried to claim my property again. You said. With Linda officially out of the picture, I could finally focus on securing my property once and for all. Her resignation had caused a ripple effect across the HOA. Members began distancing themselves from her, and the neighborhood buzzed with gossip about her fraudulent lake access fees. Still, I knew that simply ousting Linda wasn't enough. The HOA had overstepped once and there was nothing stopping them, or someone like Linda, from trying again in the future. It was time to take permanent action. The first step was reinforcing my property boundaries. I hired a surveyor to map out the exact lines of my land, ensuring everything was up to date and indisputable. Then I installed a sturdy fence along the perimeter of my lake. It wasn't just any fence either. I chose an attractive split-rail design with signs clearly stating, private property. Trespassers will be towed at owner's expense. To further drive the point home, I added motion-activated floodlights and upgraded my security cameras. If anyone even thought about setting foot on my land without permission, I'd know about it. The second step was addressing the HOA's lingering influence. I drafted a letter to the HOA board, formally requesting that they cease any mention of my property in their newsletters, maps, or communications. I included copies of my property deed and a firm warning that any future claims of HOA control over my land would result in immediate legal action. To my surprise, the remaining board members were surprisingly cooperative. Without Linda to stir the pot, they seemed eager to avoid further conflict. They even offered a public apology at the next HOA meeting, acknowledging that the lake had never been part of the community's shared resources. With those battles behind me, I decided to turn my lake into something even better, a place where I could control access and still share it responsibly. I partnered with a local outdoor club and transformed my lake into a private fishing and recreation spot. Membership was by invitation only, and I made sure the rules were crystal clear. No unauthorized access, no loud parties, and absolutely no involvement from the HOA. The club members were respectful and grateful for the opportunity. The lake became a tranquil haven for fishing enthusiasts, and I even hosted occasional family-friendly events like kayaking lessons and nature walks. Linda's downfall, meanwhile, wasn't limited to her resignation. The investigation into her fraudulent lake access fees uncovered years of financial mismanagement. She'd siphoned money from HOA dues to fund personal projects, including an ill-fated attempt to start a landscaping business. The county pressed charges and Linda faced hefty fines and probation. Unable to handle the public humiliation, she sold her house and moved out of the neighborhood entirely. As the months passed, the neighborhood settled into a new rhythm. The HOA operated more transparently under new leadership, and I even began to mend fences, figuratively speaking, with some of the neighbors who had trespassed on my property. Many of them apologized, admitting they'd been misled by Linda's lies. One sunny afternoon, I stood on the dock of my lake, watching a group of club members cast their lines into the water. The sound of birdsong and the gentle lapping of waves was a far cry from the chaos of the past year. I couldn't help but smile. The HOA had tried to take what was mine, but in the end I'd come out stronger. My lake was protected, my property was secure, and I'd turned a source of frustration into something I could be proud of. Justice wasn't just about proving Linda wrong, it was about reclaiming my peace and ensuring that no one could ever exploit me or my land again. As I cast my own fishing line into the water, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. My lake. My rules. My victory. You said,